Hey, what's going on, Hamet?
Hey, what's happening? Oh, I thought Nicole was gonna spend a little time with us. That's all
I
right. We know
know.
how to jam together.
Yeah, man, it's a pleasure to see you, man.
Always good to see you too, man. It's a crazy time, but always fun to reconnect with folks like yourself.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, to your point, this time period has made us question how we show up and how we actually think about our performance. I know for me, and I'm curious to hear, what you're studying, but for me, I've become fascinated with the area of performance called psychogenic death, which is the science of giving up and trying to understand from a physiological and cognitive perspective if we can early identify the factors that may contribute to someone quitting or giving up, can we
Putting
prevent it?
on life, quite
Quitting
literally,
on
saying
Yeah,
that.
quitting on life, right? And which is the
Wow.
most extreme version of quitting. And we see this in performance and operating businesses. We see this in sports that the greats oftentimes push themselves beyond the boundaries of human capability because
Right.
they've decided before their body has agreed to keep pushing forward. So I'm curious to hear, in your perspective, in your world, you have a tremendous track record of creating value in meaningful companies and experiences. Like, what are you seeing in terms of like cognitive performance and how people are creating value in this moment?
It's a very good question, and I actually don't want to let you off the hook about the science of death because I'm fascinated. I don't want to say I'm fascinated with death, but I am fascinated with that psychology. But let's come back to that. Um, and maybe I think it's absolutely related. I think to what we're both spending time on, which is really the science of human performance and learning what we've learned about the most elite performers in the athletic world and the commonalities that they may have with the most elite performers in every other discipline. And that very quickly has us looking at people's brains. Um, so my quick catch up and quick background. Did I lose you, Jason?
No, I'm still here.
Oh, cool. They're zooming in on both of us. That's cool. Um, so Share Ventures is entirely focused on human performance, and it was born out of being on the investment side and, frankly, scratching my head as to why there weren't a lot more investors, or frankly, a lot more companies and entrepreneurs building companies specifically in this area. And so a lot of people have different definitions of human performance. I'm really curious about yours, Jay, although I think I have some ideas, but ours is sort of thinking about the tools and technologies that will dramatically improve the way that we live and the way that we work. And so we have a venture studio model, which means that we're basically starting and incubating all the companies that we fund. But how do you define it? How do you define human performance?
Yeah. Well, first, congratulations on Share Ventures. I remember when it was a napkin sketch. So to see it manifesting in the real world, man, it warms my heart because to bring anything to life is an extreme act of defiance against the odds. So I just salute you for doing that, brother. For me, human performance really, it's two kind of factors that I look at. There's physiological, and then a lot of it is the interpersonal. So, working with athletes and and people who have to transform into this version of the exemplar self, there is a psychology around understanding when you go from being your regular self to your exemplar self. Like Joseph Campbell talks about this a lot in The Hero with a Thousand Faces, his research around the need for the archetype of a hero, which has been the basis of my entire life's journey, henceforth why I have the name Lucius Fox as my nickname, because I've always wanted to be a person who uses my gifts and talents to support these people who are doing these humanly impossible tasks. So,
Right.
from an introspective perspective, meaning just that inner dialogue, what I think about is how people have that inner conversation that allows them to push beyond their boundaries or their feelings of discomfort, which is one of the core principles of athleticism and what we would call fourth quarter performance. So when you look at an athlete, there is the NBA. There's a lot of people in the NBA who are great, but there's only a few people who are the greatest because they've decided in their mind and then their body follow to pursue these endeavors that are seemingly difficult. Now, on the physiological side, I've been really fascinated around restoration and recovery and prevention, and prevention, especially through the lens of play. Because in health and wellness, we often talk about how do we help people lose weight, feel better, go further, run faster. But when I think about my life's purpose, I always tell people I want to build stronger children instead of fixing broken adults. And what I mean by that is that through play and creativity, exploration, and introspection, we're able to give children this ability to be curious and master discovery instead of just rote memorization, which is what our education system teaches them. And so, I've looked at every single factor, man. And what I've decided is that I want to dedicate my work and my own personal interest into this area of prevention, and prevention through the lens of physical play and using creativity as a mechanism for societal change. So that's how I would define it in this stage of my career. And it's been a journey, but it's been exciting to see people come along with me and to really understand the power of investing early in children's lives as a form of prevention and also catalyzation.
I love that. And by the way, congratulations on the new role at Logitech, man. I've seen what's been happening from afar, and know Andy Walsh, who's been pioneering a lot of stuff in the human performance space. And so when they got you to join, I was like, oh wow, they're really off to the races though. So congrats, and let's find some ways to work together for sure. I'm curious about this. When you mention this death thing, it's interesting. And I'll tell you a quick story. I have a friend who told me she's starting a company focused on death. And at first I was like, ooh, this is gothic. It's almost scary. But the more I heard her describe, her name is Donna Bird, the more I heard her describe what she was doing and thinking about basically reimagining the funeral business, the more it got me thinking about just the concept of death and what it means and how it shines a light really on how we should live. And so is that what you were talking about when you talk about digging into that, the concept of giving up, or is it something that is is it really about resilience, and what does it take to have deep resilience?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So where psychogenic death, the field of research that I'm talking about, comes from is early on they would look at prisoners of war and why prisoners of war would pass away even if they didn't have any physiological factors that contributed to their death. Like they weren't wounded, they weren't starved, but somehow their brain decided that they're captive, they need to shut down their body, and they passed away. So when you extrapolate that concept into the moment we're living in, which is the largest, at least in my lifetime, or probably several lifetimes, the largest mass traumatic experience we have ever seen, we need to immediately think about the preventative measures required to help people understand how to transition out of this traumatic moment into whatever they do next. Because if you bias towards worrying and you bias towards concern, now you start to have these stressors, high blood pressure, heart disease, right? The release of cortisol, weight gain. And what they're seeing with COVID is that a lot of people are having a neurological response coming out of this, feeling as if that something is wrong with them. So I'm biasing towards an outcome where I'm like, all right, if I know a certain percentage of this population may be affected by psychogenic death, how can I learn from that and then put the things into place with the work that I'm doing with EPO and the content I put out to give them some type of encouragement to persist? Because at the end of the day, if the mind controls the body, then what's controlling the mind? Is it the conditions we live in? Is it the things we tell ourselves? Is it what we believe to be true? So I'm trying to really get to the core of belief, because according to where I come from, I'm a walking statistical anomaly. And it's only because I believe that my life is possible that it is possible. So I'm trying to figure out the best way to preserve this essence of wonderment and joy and imagination and belief in the face of this globally shared traumatic experience, which may or may not cause a lot of people to give up. Because we need a generation of dreamers and creators to solve some of the problems that will arise from this moment. And like I said, my focus on children, the work that I do, is really built around making sure that they have the skill sets and capabilities to solve some of humanity's greatest problems, which they will naturally inherit as a result of our decisions today.
It's well said. It's well said. You know, something I think about a lot is just the mindset we have to be in to be creative. And let's be honest, creativity and innovation are really one and the same, right? And innovation is going to be what it takes for us to write the course, so to speak. I'm just curious how you think about it, because you think about the role that stress plays, psychological stress plays in our lives, and we know it can be a good thing. We know it can cause us to act when we need to act, and we know it can help us focus when we need to focus. We also know it's very dangerous, and I'm sure there are lots of people in the audience that are building trackers and all sorts of sensors and ways to sort of mitigate stress and think about. I've been thinking quite a bit recently about that needle that we're trying to thread. Enough stress to be engaged, but enough ability to control and modulate that stress to be creative and innovative, to solve problems and to have our eyes wide open. And I'm just curious, I remember you and I have talked about this before, because a lot of people don't realize, Jason, you were involved very early at the Jordan brand as a designer. But how do you think about it? Like, as you think about the teams that you're working with, or even yourself, what sort of environment allows you to perform at your best as it relates to innovation or creative tasks?
Oh man, that's such a phenomenal question. I think for me, I would reframe the word stress more towards tension. So I'm a big fan of Buckminster Fuller and his principles of tensegrity. And the thing that's so interesting about tensegrity is this tension and structural integrity mashed together, right? It's how we build suspension bridges. That's what great innovation and a great process looks like. It's two opposing concepts, sometimes three opposing concepts. And in the middle, you find this intersectionality that gets to the core of the problem you're trying to solve in the purest way. So in working in human performance in the early days of building Jordan brand, and I'm much older than I look, people trip out when they hear how long I've been in this industry. I'm old enough. It's that creative tension, right? Because what I love about that friction that exists with the creative process is that good design is great restraint, right? Innovation is like getting a block of marble and chipping away to the rawest, most purest expression of what your idea is. Most people think design is an additive process. That's not design. That's just creation. You just make something. But when you make something better, it's about editing. And you have to have discipline, you have to have tension, and you have to have disparate opposing points of views to edit it in a way where people can collectively gain value from what you're putting into the world. And so because we've conflated, the act of producing and production with good design, and the tools have been democratized, I think we're getting to a stage now where everyone knows what would be considered good or bad creation, good or bad design. Now I think we're going to get to an extreme amount of, people scaling taste and technology, scaling taste and physical goods, scaling taste and experiences, because it's not about, who can be first. It's about who can serve me better, who has the greatest purpose, who has the greatest utility, because we're living beyond the days of hype. And so now purpose has replaced hype. So when it's purposeful and it's intentional, you have to have that editing. You have to have that tension in order to serve, the audience in the way that you want to serve them.
Got it. Yeah, it's interesting, man. It's a very interesting time and a very interesting thing. We've been studying quite a bit the psychometrics of the highest performing groups and teams. And it's really fascinating to learn, this question I asked you around how stress impacts you and how stress impacts your performance, and what that, and you're speaking to that tension. It's funny. There's so much variety. The more we learn, the more we see the variety in what things move people. There are definitely some patterns and some constants just in the way our brain is wired that impact how we behave. But when we look at a given team, so many different things can move people in different ways. You remember that study that Google did on psychological safety a little while ago, probably 4 or 5 years ago?
Yeah.
It's interesting because they scratched the surface on something I think that hopefully guys like us will start to peel back even more. And that's like, what are the predictors of the best groups? Now, obviously, you and I probably get called 5 to 6 times a week to sit on diversity panels. No, I do. I'm not to have any qualification on diversity other than the fact that and actually now I do have quite a bit of qualification because I've sat on enough diversity. I heard some experts talking, I learned something. But when I think about that diversity through the lens of optimal performance and through the lens of psychometrics on teams, I find it really interesting because today more than ever, we have to design cultures without the benefit of being proximate, without the ability for us going to hang out, have a drink, or even go shoot baskets. Like all those tools that we use to build trust and connection and communication that ultimately helped us work together and collaborate in teams and groups. All of that is something we don't have. And so I think it's an interesting time for us to flex muscles that might even be deeper muscles. Like, how do we get to align with each other sheerly off of our purpose and our missions being super aligned without all the props? You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I totally agree, man. And there are two things that I think come into play in regards to when we talk about diversity that people don't take into account in modern research. One, the field of epigenetics and the fact that Black people and people of color, or people who've been from cultures that experience trauma, we genetically are predisposed to having historical trauma passed on to us. So we're born already with trauma in our DNA. That has been proven scientifically. It's a lot of white papers out there. So that's the first factor. Context, right? Everyone assumes in research we're starting from the same place. We're not. And I think we need to be more nuanced to that. The second is, for some reason, because of our higher level of consciousness as humans, we've forgotten that we're part of an ecosystem. Marine biology studies diversity very, very, very well to find what is the most harmonious balance of microorganisms and species that exist within the landscape of this ecosystem to make it have a harmonious outcome. We remove ourselves from that ideologically and philosophically because we don't remember that we are animals that are all part of this ecosystem. So when we talk about what's happening with diversity and inclusion, we have to understand that if we remove the bees from pollinating plants and that somehow is connected to climate change, then if something's happening to a group of people that's disproportionate, that also could affect the ecosystem of how we live together. So I have never done this research, but that's the stuff that I'm curious to figure out. That is there a correlation or causation between what we're seeing in the environment around us, meaning, our natural environment, with the way that we treat each other? Because we know it's true when we look at microorganisms and we look at marine biology. So if we're animals and we're part of this species, part of this ecosystem, there has to be some indicators there, has to be some connectivity. So a lot of the work that I'm doing, with the stuff I'm going to initiate with the Elite Performer Offense, is investigating unique concepts like this. Like, how do we think about these ways of showing up in a world that are unique and distinct, but also bring us closer together to look at how we all are interconnected and interdependent, even if it's not necessarily obvious at first. A couple scratches beneath the surface, we'll find these things that we each share that will hopefully bring us together. So that to me is the genesis of a lot of the work that I'm curious, to pursue in this stage of my career.
I am as well, man. I think if we could figure out what that is, particularly where it's difficult to, when you're building a team, you haven't met the person in person, and now you're having to figure out how you find that deep bond. And we know it's possible. Gamers have been doing it for quite a long time, and so it's absolutely possible. But in the enterprise, how do we figure out how to enable that in a way that's cool? I think there's a phenomenal product and technology probably that could be delivered in that space. I'm just curious. I know the audience, the trans tech audience, Nicole always does an incredible job bringing like-minded folks together. I miss actually seeing people in person. There's so many collisions that we could have with folks that are like-minded. I'm wondering if you and I could jam on some stuff that might make it easy for folks that are listening to be able to reach out to either one of us, and maybe we can find ways to work together or work with each other to go after things that we're curious. I'll just start off something, because I was having a breakout earlier that Nicole facilitated as part of this conference. And we were talking about, I think I asked the question, I was like, has anyone seen any interesting new enabling technologies for mental health? I think that was the question. Like, what enabling technologies are out there that are potentially breakthrough that can help dramatically increase the efficacy of some of the mental health interventions, or maybe there's a new intervention out there. And one of the gentlemen was talking about very interesting combinations of light therapy and sound therapy that could trigger new neuropsychological states that could be used to dramatically accelerate meditation. And I found that super interesting. I'd also heard and looked and done some early research around, vagal nerve stimulation. And I think there have been some folks that have also been looking at electric stimulation to do this. That's one of the things that I'm interested in. So if there are folks out there that are doing research in that area, I'd love for them to hit me up, and maybe we can figure out something to build together. But what about you, Jay? What are you looking for from a collaboration standpoint with people in the audience?
Yeah, I think for me, where I'm a huge, uh, I would say, advocate for at this stage in my career is thinking about a moment in our country's development and the world's development where the concept of diversity will be significantly challenged because of the intermixing between cultures. I'm the byproduct of two different cultures. My children are a byproduct of two different cultures. They're biracial. So when we look at 2040, 2050, when a majority of this country will either be mixed race or Latino or Black, how do we talk about diversity then? How are we talking about creating equitable and sustainable, environments when everyone is a mixture of everyone else? That's going to be a concept that we significantly challenge.
We're almost there now. I remember picking up my son back when we were going to school, and I was like,
Yeah.
everyone is tan. Like everyone is tan. Pretty crazy. Culturally very, and that needs to be acknowledged, but incredible how everyone's starting to look tan.
Exactly. So then what are the indicators to have a harmonious balance? Is it socioeconomics? Is it education? Is it belief system? So those are the things I want to think about now, because we'll once again end up in a future where we'll find ways to separate ourselves or to challenge each other if we don't start designing for that future today. So if anyone is trying to be faster in the future, and you're thinking about what happens when this world is fully blended, and you're thinking about society and education systems and access and equality and wealth creation within these disparate communities or marginalized communities, that is not only transformational but generationally sustainable, that's the stuff that I'm interested in, because I do believe the way that we're going to solve a lot of our challenges is through creativity, and not just creativity in the performing arts, but creativity through the lens of how we think, because that difference and that distinction is going to allow us to have these broad sweeping outcomes that allow everyone or majority of people to benefit from the innovation that we create.